We had spoken about Tumbbad in brief earlier, in our video on Best Indian Horror Films. And now when this cult classic of Indian horror genre has re-released in the theatres, we thought of sharing our love for the film with all of you in further details. The movie, inspired from the stories of Narayan Dharup, is a brilliant piece of genre cinema, arguably the finest horror film from India, and then there is so much more. Of course, there's the subtext of greed, the inheritance of material love, and the consistent descent into the cycle of ravenousness, sin, and eventual ruin. But is that all? We don't think so. We believe director Rahi Anil Barve and Adesh Prasad, along with creative director Anand Gandhi, subtly uses the backdrop of Pune in pre-independence India to narrate the roots of a nation in the making, thriving on injustice, misogyny, casteism, and most certainly, greed. The film starts with us introduced to the myth of Hastar, the firstborn of the goddess Prosperity, who succumbed to his greed for all gold and food from his mother. While he could gather all the gold, he was attacked by other gods when he went for the food, only to find shelter back in his mother's womb, with a promise that no one would ever worship him, and his name would gradually be forgotten for good. And thus Tumbbad upfront establishes a myth of dystopia, a reversal of the natural cycle of progression of ill omen, like a child returning back to the womb it was born from. The mother's womb, the epitome of comfort and protection, becomes the claustrophobic site of violence and conflict across the film, the spitting red battleground between a greedy god and his greedy victims. Note that while the story of the intergenerational greed unfolds, Tumbbad also marks the roadmap to the birth of a nation, of India. A nation who ends up killing its father at the outset of its birth, its independence, by a certain Nathuram Godse based out of Pune, not so far from the horror of Tumbbad. Nathuram Vinayak Rao Godse. Friends and fans of Tumbbad, does the name ring a bell? You can see how the creative minds behind the film subtly establish the mythic horror of one family's greed as a microcosm of a nation in the making. It suggests how a nation which promised order, peace and justice for its long tormented subjects turned out to be an equally unfair and unjust to them, if not more, for the sake of a handful of feudal lords. And one such feudal lord, his inheritance and their ancestral abode becomes the setting for Tumbbad, the site of horror. This is the same family, the Raos who had built a temple for the outcast god Hastar, despite divine precautions in pursuit of the gold the god had accumulated, thereby entering into a vicious cycle of materialistic greed. And look how these precautions are ignored by each generation of ancestry. The mother who still craves for the gold coins in spite of what has happened to the grandmother. Vinayak who comes back to Tumbbad breaking his promise made to his mother. Or Pandurang who in his obsession of gold doesn't follow his father's guidance inside Tumbbad's hidden belly. And as a nation, have we learned from the past? Or are historical memories being milked for fundamentalist ideologies to usher further atrocities on the poor, the weak, the have-nots only? As vengeance multiplies like the greed of the Raos into a parallel descent of sin and eventual ruin. While the horror of Tumbbad unravels, director Barve and Prasad intelligently places the horrors of the society across the film. There are references to caste hierarchy, to the Sati tradition, and how Raghav, belonging to the upper caste, could avoid Vinayak's mistress from burning on his dead husband's pyre in exchange of money. A typical case of differential approach towards crime and punishment based on the perpetrator's caste identity. There's references of gender politics, of misogyny, as Vinayak taunts at his wife's financial empowerment, keeps a mistress while his wife has to accept it. And then comes the most horrific sequence of the film, as Vinayak's son Pandurang perceives this habitual misogyny, realizes how money is the order of the society, and follows his father's footstep. We might very well suggest how the brilliantly lit grimy underground scenes with Vinayak and Hastar, or the first encounter of the young Vinayak with his grandmother, are the dreadful most sequences of the film. But if you ask us, it's that scene with Pandurang holding a gold coin in his hand, standing below the stairs to the room of Vinayak's mistress, as she too considers the deal. They approach each other. Pandurang hands over the coin as the film shifts to the next sequence, leaving us shock and dreadful imaginations. That way, Tumbbad is a successor to Michael Haneke's award-winning film, The White Ribbon, where the maverick director had studied children in German village years before the World War I, where these same children might have played a part. Like The White Ribbon, Tumbbad is also a study of a nation in the making with premonitions of horror to come. Midway into the film, There's this scene where Raghav and the British police officer try to strike an opium deal. While our attention is drawn to their discussion on profit and money, there's something going on just beside. A couple of police officers manhandle a freedom fighter on road as an elite of his country engages in corruption with one from the British authority. Isn't this the story even today? Most of us ensuring our self-profits and luxury while selfless lots suffer just beside. The horror of Tumbbad's myth runs parallel to the horror of the oppressive and patriarchal feudal framework in pre-independence India, and then into the post-independence India. The metaphors dazzle as we watch Vinayak offering Hastar human replicas to eat as he steals his gold. And what happens if Hastar can catch hold of you? You don't die, but get turned into a demonic shape and live forever, eternally hungry and wishing for death. Note that the reference of Hastar comes from Stephen King's short story Grammar, where a young George Buckner tries to take care of his ailing grandmother, much like the young Vinayak in Tumbbad, taming the demon inside her down, invoking the name of Hastar, as the evil passes on to him. Grammar, which in turn was inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft, set in the Cthulhu mythos. So it is about our inherent vice of materialistic hunger that can bring together Indian folklore and Cthulhu mythos that unites men and women in greed, that passes from the gods to the kings, to the lords, and to the newly elected government of a supposedly democratic nation. Actor-producer Soham Shah shares in an interview about the alternate ending of Tumbbad that was conceived, about an ending where Pandurang dragging his father's body across the vast plains of Tumbbad as vehicles from Indian government move towards the ruin. Perhaps it would make more sense as the cycle of subjugation would continue into the nation that we built together till this day. Perhaps that is where the upcoming sequel of the film will take us to. And for us, let us try to understand and observe what the grandmother suggested to Vinayak before her freedom, her death. विरासत में मिली हुई हर चीज पर दावा नहीं करना चाहिए. Not everything you inherit should be claimed. That is all from us today. Thank you for watching. If you like our content, please subscribe.